Adventure Ledger presents Shadows in the Sun, Episode 1. Oliver Matthews stepped off the plane and into the thin, crisp air of La Paz. His chest tightened slightly as he inhaled, the altitude immediately making its presence known. He paused, adjusting his backpack and trying to catch his breath, though a surge of excitement was already filling his lungs. This was exactly what he had been searching for. A world so different from the mundane streets of London. Bolivia. Adventure. Freedom. His first few days in the city were a blur of colors, sounds, and smells. The market seemed to pulse with energy, filled with vibrant textiles and strange herbs. Local women in their bowler hats and colorful skirts haggled over prices while tourists marveled at the chaos. The witches' market fascinated him the most. It was a place where ancient traditions met modern curiosities, herbs for healing, talismans for protection, and even llama fetuses hanging from stalls, waiting for ritual offerings. The air felt mystical, charged with a kind of energy Oliver had never known. He felt alive. Each evening, as the sun set behind the jagged peaks of the Andes, the city seemed to glow. The streets of La Paz wound steeply downward, twisting and turning, and it was easy to get lost. But Oliver didn't mind. Getting lost was part of the adventure. He was here to escape, to leave behind the suffocating life in London, the dead-end jobs, and the memories of the breakup that had pushed him to take this trip in the first place. Here he was someone else, a new version of himself. And yet, in the back of his mind, there was a sense of unease. Something, he couldn't quite place it. He brushed it off, determined not to let fear taint his adventure. It was on the third day, as he wandered through the narrow streets of the San Francisco Plaza, that he met Luis. Luis Torres appeared out of nowhere, sliding up beside Oliver with an easy, confident smile. He was a local, dressed in worn jeans and a button-up shirt, his hair slightly tousled like he'd just come from a party. He introduced himself in English, though his accent hinted at his Bolivian roots. "You look lost," Luis said with a grin. Oliver laughed, shrugging. "Maybe a little. I was just exploring." Luis gestured to the chaotic market around them. "You don't really see the real Bolivia like this. If you want, I could show you around, take you to where the tourists don't go." There was something in Luis's smile that put Oliver at ease. Maybe it was the casual charm, or maybe it was just the idea that someone was offering him exactly what he wanted. An authentic experience. The real Bolivia. Without thinking, he said yes. The streets felt different when you were with a local. Luis seemed to know everyone. As they walked, people greeted him, locals selling food, vendors with brightly colored ponchos, even the older women with their bowler hats gave him nods of recognition. Oliver marveled at how connected Luis seemed to the pulse of the city. He felt like he was seeing a side of La Paz that tourists rarely experienced. Luis led him through narrow alleyways, past hidden doorways that opened into lively courtyards filled with people, music, and the scent of grilling meat. "This is the real Bolivia," Luis said as they entered one such courtyard where a street party was in full swing. The rhythmic thumping of drums filled the air, and the sound of laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses. Oliver's heart raced with excitement. This was what he'd come for, adventure. He followed Luis deeper into the crowd, letting the music sweep him away. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so free. The breakup, the endless monotony of London, it all seemed like a distant memory now. Luis handed him a drink, and Oliver took it without hesitation. The liquid burned down his throat, but it only made him feel more alive. "What is this?" Oliver asked, coughing slightly but laughing. Luis grinned. "Chicha, homemade, you'll get used to it." The party was exhilarating. People danced in the courtyard, their movements wild and unrestrained. Oliver watched, captivated, as the sun sank lower in the sky, casting the streets in a soft, golden glow. The vibrant colors of the market earlier that day paled in comparison to the fiery energy of this celebration. As the night wore on, the crowd thickened. The air grew heavier, the energy more intense. Luis, always at Oliver's side, leaned in close at one point, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "I have a job for you." Oliver blinked, confused for a moment. "A job?" Luis smiled, that easy, confident smile. "Nothing big, just a delivery, easy money. You want to experience the real Bolivia, right? There was something in the way Luis said it, something that made Oliver hesitate. But the drinks, the music, the thrill of the night dulled his caution. He wanted adventure. He wanted to belong here in this strange and exciting world. Sure, Oliver said. What's the job? Luis's eyes gleamed as he handed Oliver a small, nondescript package wrapped in brown paper. It was light, barely the size of a paperback book, and when Oliver took it, it felt innocent enough in his hands. All you need to do is take this across town. There's a guy waiting for it, a friend of mine. He'll pay you, and we'll meet up later. Oliver frowned slightly. That's it? What's in it? Luis waved a dismissive hand. Nothing you need to worry about, just some documents, legal stuff. Easy job. The music pounded in the background, the beat vibrating through Oliver's chest. He glanced around the crowded courtyard, feeling the heat of the bodies packed in around him, the pull of the night's energy. Maybe it was the drink, or maybe it was the desire to fit in, but the doubts that had bubbled up quickly faded. Luis was his friend. He wouldn't get him into trouble. Okay, Oliver said, gripping the package tightly. Luis clapped him on the shoulder, a wide grin spreading across his face. Good man, I knew you'd be up for it. They left the party together, the streets of La Paz quieter now, the night settling in. Luis gave him a set of instructions, where to go, who to meet, and then vanished into the crowd with a casual wave. Oliver stood there for a moment, the package in his hands, feeling a strange mix of excitement and nerves. This was the real Bolivia, he told himself. This was the adventure he had wanted. The walk across town was surreal. The once bustling streets were now empty, the only sounds the occasional echo of distant music and the soft hum of the city at rest. The high-altitude air was cool against his skin, clearing the fog of the drinks from his mind. He replayed Luis's instructions in his head as he made his way to the designated spot, a small side street just outside the main market district. When he arrived, a man was already waiting for him. Dressed in a dark jacket, the man stood in the shadows of the alley, his face partially obscured by the dim streetlights. Oliver hesitated, clutching the package tightly. The man stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "The package," he said in a thick accent, his voice low. For a moment, Oliver's instincts screamed at him to turn back, to walk away, but he pushed the thought aside. This was just a simple delivery, a favor for Luis, nothing more. He handed over the package, the weight of the situation still not fully sinking in. The man inspected it briefly, then nodded and pulled out a wad of cash, pressing it into Oliver's hand without another word. Oliver exhaled, relief washing over him. That was easier than he had expected. He stuffed the money into his pocket and turned to leave, his steps quickening as he headed back toward the center of the city. The streets were darker now, the lights casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. He told himself it was nothing, just nerves. As he neared the main plaza, the distant wail of sirens reached his ears. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder with each passing second. Oliver's heart began to race. What if? No. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the creeping anxiety. It had nothing to do with him. The police were probably responding to some street fight or disturbance. He kept walking, though his pace quickened, his eyes darting to the side streets, checking for anything out of the ordinary. Then, out of nowhere, bright headlights flooded the street in front of him. A police van screeched to a halt, cutting off his path. Before he could react, 2 officers jumped out, shouting at him in rapid Spanish. He froze, his body stiffening as one of the officers grabbed him roughly by the arm, shoving him against the side of the van. What's going on?" Oliver stammered, trying to explain, but they weren't listening. One of them barked orders into his radio, while the other quickly patted him down, pulling the cash from his pocket and inspecting it. The officer's expression darkened. In a blur, Oliver was shoved into the back of the van, the door slamming shut behind him. The van sped through the streets, the engine roaring as it weaved in and out of traffic. Oliver sat in the back, his heart pounding, his mind racing. What had just happened? He tried to piece it together, but the more he thought about it, the more confused he became. The package, Luis had said it was nothing important, just documents. So why was he being arrested? Panic started to creep in, tightening his chest. He had no idea where they were taking him, or what he was being charged with. He didn't even speak enough Spanish to understand what the officers were saying. His thoughts raced back to Luis, to the street party, to the easy confidence with which Luis had handed him the package. He should have asked more questions. He should have. The van jerked to a stop, and the doors flew open. The officers dragged him out, their grips ironclad as they hauled him through a set of heavy metal doors. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and disinfectant. A dull fluorescent light flickered overhead as they led him down a narrow corridor lined with grim-faced guards. They shoved him into a small, dimly lit room where two more officers sat behind a desk, their expressions cold and unreadable. One of them began speaking rapidly in Spanish, gesturing toward the money they had taken from his pocket. Oliver didn't understand a word, but the tone was unmistakable. This was serious. I don't know what's going on," Oliver said, his voice trembling. He tried to keep his hands from shaking, but the fear was setting in now. He wasn't just a tourist anymore. He was trapped. The officer behind the desk narrowed his eyes, leaning forward as he spoke again, slower this time, as though he were explaining something to a child. "You," he said, tapping the table in front of him. "Drugs." Oliver's stomach dropped. "Drugs? No. There had to be some mistake." "No, I didn't. I don't have anything to do with drugs," he stammered, his voice rising. "It was just a package. I didn't know." But the officers weren't listening. They exchanged a look, and one of them made a quick motion with his hand, signaling to the guards at the door. Oliver was grabbed again, pulled to his feet, and dragged out of the room. They led him deeper into the facility, the walls growing more and more claustrophobic with each step. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow hue. The guards spoke to each other in low voices, their expressions indifferent, as if this was just another routine arrest. But for Oliver, this was anything but routine. This was a nightmare. They pushed him into a small cell and slammed the door shut behind him. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed in the tiny space, and for the first time, the full weight of his situation hit him. He was trapped, in a foreign country, with no way out. He sank to the floor, his back pressed against the cold, hard wall. His mind raced, replaying everything that had happened. How had it come to this? Just a few hours ago, he'd been at a street party, feeling more alive than he had in months. Now he was locked up in some Bolivian jail, accused of something he didn't even understand. He thought of Luis, the easy smile, the friendly demeanor. How had he been so blind? Luis had set him up. He'd used him, knowing exactly what would happen. And now Oliver was paying the price. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder. Oliver looked up just as a guard appeared at the door, unlocking it with a quick, practiced motion. He gestured for Oliver to stand, his expression unreadable. Oliver's heart pounded in his chest. What now? What was happening? The guard led him back through the maze of corridors, past rows of cells, until they reached another door. This one heavier, with reinforced steel bars. The guard knocked once, and the door creaked open. Inside was a large room, dimly lit, and filled with the hum of low conversations. At the far end of the room, behind a desk, sat a man Oliver didn't recognize. He looked up as Oliver entered, his eyes cold and calculating. "Well," the man said, leaning back in his chair, "you've made quite the mistake, haven't you?" Oliver's stomach twisted. The door behind him clicked shut.
This is the end of the episode. Thank you for listening. If you like the story, please subscribe to our channel and check out our other stories. You can find the link to the next episode in the description below. What do you think about this episode? Let us know in the comment section below.